This is about me, and that it's actually difficult um, as a disabled person because it adds up the stereotypes that all people with disabilities are sick people and all of that. So if you take that stereotype away, that would be very helpful. Um, I had 4 strokes within a year, and the last one, which was the worst one, was on the 4th of April 2013. Okay? And there's some things that I say that may not be relevant, but I think they are. And the first thing was about dignity. The ambulance, I was already a disabled person and a permanent wheelchair user when I took the strokes. So for me, my wheelchair was very, very important. So the first thing was I couldn't take it with me for a blue light ambulance. And that was very difficult because it made me lacking in the independence that I had. And that was very important to me. So I don't know if that's within your powers, but if you could do something about that, that would be very helpful. I spent 26 hours on a trolley in Antrim Hospital on the 4th stroke, which was my more severe stroke. And there, I think the key thing is about communication. I think that people are so busy and working so hard that there is no experience of people who are different. And I think just like the Roma and the travellers, I think that thing is very important. Plus, I don't think there's any disaggregate information on anything on Section 75, but that's another for another time. And the beds were so tight that you couldn't take your wheelchair in. There was no opportunity in the space that was available other than to make my wheelchair look as if it was an obstacle anywhere. And that was really more difficult, especially if you were 26 hours on that trolley. Also, if you have anything like a scoliosis or something like that, it's always difficult to be comfortable on a trolley, but it was particularly difficult for me because I couldn't stand, I couldn't sit. There was nothing that I could do without help being given, and that was very difficult for staff who were already they weren't reluctant, but they couldn't do it, is what I'm saying. I think the other thing is they were too busy to listen, and I think that was very, very important because you couldn't get a drink, you couldn't get some food, all of those things. And I have diabetes, so I needed to eat, not often but regularly, and that wasn't available to me. Really, I think the independence and dignity that I deserved was not given, and that for me was the very obvious thing. Also, in terms of independent living, Article 19 of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities give me that right, and that certainly was not given to me on any. I have not a lot of memory of the first 3 strokes, but I have of that one, and I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be unjust to say the same thing happened before, but I have no knowledge, no memory of that. What I can say is, once I went into the ward, same thing happened, although not as severely. People didn't understand. They didn't take the time to understand, and that made it much more difficult for me as an individual, and also many people with disabilities. I'm thinking, for example, of people with a learning disability trying to contain that kind of environment, and they couldn't do it. As people who are blind or deaf couldn't either. And I think I haven't got any real specialism or real recommendation, but the thing I would say is that they need to do something about people who are different. They're not special, but they are different. And I don't think that can happen. Now, it's not my job to tell you how it happens, but it has to happen because I found the experience as a person who was sick, and I wasn't often sick, but I was sick that time, particularly the dignity and the helplessness that I saw wasn't very nice, to put it mildly. And I think that has to change. And it's 45,000 people with disabilities. Comes eventually.
Okay, Monica, thank you.
That's all right.
I've two questions, and then I'll ask colleagues on the panel. In terms of your very personal experience and the fourth of the strokes, reflecting back, what would have made that a different experience for you in those circumstances? What are the things that could or should have been done differently? You mentioned, for example, not being able to take your wheelchair. I've no idea. Did they give an explanation as to why you couldn't, or is that simply
it's an access issue.
Okay. And
also that the ambulance drivers have to concentrate on the patient. I understand that, but for me it was my legs, it was my dignity, it was all those things.
Sure.
So I think if you could reach the ambulance service and get them to do technical things to their ambulances, that would be a good idea, but I don't think it'll work.
Okay, and then in terms of the experience of 26 hours is a very long time to be in an emergency department. What would have made a difference to your experience? And I'm thinking of things like, we've heard, for example, one trust that simply has two people 24/7 who are neither nurses nor clinicians, who simply go around and check how people are, whether they've had pain relief, whether they need a cup of tea, etc. Would something as basic as that have made a difference?
Yes, it would.
And what else would have made a difference, do you think, on reflection?
I don't mean a separate area, but I mean somewhere where either the trolleys were of a different style, or something about the physical environment of the building, of the A&E, that made it easier for people. I felt very, I could have sat up for 24 hours in my chair if I could have done that. That would have been much, much preferable to me, but I couldn't do that because there was nowhere that I saw that would make my chair seem anything but a hindrance. And I couldn't do that. You can't get other patients to be disrupted because of me, so that couldn't happen. But something about a proper area where people who have special needs can express those, not in any segregated sense, but in a sense that people would get better treatment if they could get that. And it wouldn't have to be a big area; it would just have to be somewhere that was safe and comfortable. Because I think the other thing that I spoke about dignity, but I also spoke about safety. Where you're here and there's a person who's actually this much from you, and you can't turn or stand yourself. That's very difficult because you use other people's spaces to do that, which is an invasion of their privacy as well. So that was the other thing. But I think a couple of people who are not clinicians but who are there to give practical help is a really good example.
And my other question is, again, 26 hours is a very long time. When you arrived, did you have any indication it was going to be I'm assuming it was 26 hours because they didn't have a bed to admit you to
I don't
a
know.
ward?
Nobody told me why it was 26
Well, I was
hours.
going to ask you, did you have any indication of how long it was going to be, or
No.
were you waiting hour after hour,
Yeah.
not knowing whether it was going to be 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours, until finally a day
Yeah.
later?
I presume it was about beds, but I don't know. Nobody told me. I didn't know anything. And at the beginning, when I was coming in, there were queued up ambulances. There weren't enough in the space for people to be. I don't know what they call it, to register. There wasn't enough space for people to do there. So everywhere, it struck me as it was. I'm trying to say it. No, I'm not going to say it. I'm going to say it whatever way I say. It seemed that there were too many people. There was an inconvenience about it, and I don't mean any disrespect to the staff. Maybe it was about coping. Maybe they weren't coping, but certainly felt that you were a number and that was it. And if you had any special needs at all, they weren't catered for. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. Okay, thank you. Marion?
Monica, I think have one question, and it was, given the experience you've had in April of 2013, did you feel that you should make a complaint, or did you complain about your treatment?
No, I didn't, because I thought that's what happens to everybody. No, I didn't, and I didn't actually see it as a human rights thing, which is very unusual, because most of the work that I do is around that. So I thought that was very strange. I don't know why, but I thought it was very strange. But certainly it was. It didn't enter my thoughts at all.
I'm just wondering, in terms of, part of complaining is being able to influence for the future. And you've had a lifetime of involvement in trying to influence the agenda for people with a disability. And I'm wondering if there were opportunities for you to provide that sort of input. Is that the sort of thing, if the trusts were setting up panels with people with a disability, that you would be interested in?
Well, I might be, but I would be hesitant about it because of the stereotyping issue. I think, disabled people are not any sicker than anybody else. And I think that panels of people who represent disabled people, there are hundreds of disabled people, and there are hundreds of particular needs. So I think all of those things would make me hesitant. I would sit on any committee. So that's not the important thing. The important thing is that the stereotyping, I think, is the key issue.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, Paul?
Thanks a lot, Monica, for your help this afternoon. I really appreciate it. I think just two questions. The first, I wonder if in your long experience working on these issues, whether or not you've encountered differences amongst the health trusts in their attitude to those with disabilities. Have you found the practice fairly uniform across Northern Ireland, or have you found some trusts, you needn't name them, you can if you want, but have you found some trusts better than others? I'm just trying to get a sense of whether or not there's a sort of uniform practice or whether it's patchy.
It's uniform. I find it depends on the circumstance. I wouldn't go to the Royal sometimes, but I would at other times. But no, it's patchy. It's not patchy, it's consistent. And I think it's about busyness. I think it's about the emergency bit of it. But in other things that this inquiry is not looking at, there are many patchiness, but not in this one.
Okay, thank you. And the second question, my second and last question, it's about the human rights approach. And in the work of the centre, of course, is grounded in human rights for people with disabilities. I wondered if you could help me understand the degree to which trusts are open to in your experience, trusts are open to the explicit use of the human rights framework.
Some of our training materials have been around that, and one trust has used it. But I think that's about a training program. That's not about how you embed that in the life of the trust. I think the other thing is they've got a mixed message. It's about stereotyping thing. It's about you are dependent, so therefore that all gets into the same routine. But it isn't about dependence, it's about independence. And I think that's a very different way of dealing with it. For trusts, I think they're a bit, I don't know how you... they are very... they are not able to take the main thought and about disabled people into a human rights approach. It's certainly not a human rights approach in terms of any of the trusts I do. Although they are changing, but it's changing too slowly, and definitely too slowly.
And can you account for that slowness? Are there particular obstacles to the more systematic and explicit use of the human rights framework?
Yeah, it hasn't been used in terms of people with disability. Well, it's hardly been used at all, but that's my personal opinion. But it hasn't been used for people with disabilities because of the diversity of disability and the fact that some people can't speak for themselves. People don't communicate well. And I think certainly in terms of my personal experience, if I had been the first half of the 26 hours, I couldn't speak, and that was really very scary because once I get the figures over, I'm renowned for my speech. So for me that was very important. But more important than that was the fact that people could not communicate. Whether it's their busyness or their anxiety or whatever, you felt like you weren't human. You felt that you weren't part of it. You felt that you were helpless and you were alone in a very crowded place.
Monica, thank you very, very much.
It's all right, no problem at all.
Monica, I have one final question, and it's drawing on your experience in disability action, and that is around the trusts and how they involve user groups in developing and designing services, and whether you have a view on how good or otherwise trusts are, and again whether the experience is one that's across the trusts or whether there are particular trusts you think do it better than others. But what's your experience about trusts utilising the experience of users in developing and designing services?
Certainly in designing, not at all. In developing, I think that there are equality committees, there are those kinds of structures now being established relatively, they haven't been going for very long, but I think that the real experience of a range of people with disabilities is not usefully drawn upon. I think that many people think the external environment and coming in a back door and those kinds of things, that we're making too much of them, but they actually tell you very quickly how you feel about disabled people, and not just doing sorry, this is very frustrating, but anyway, that you don't just top the surface, that people are actually doing what they said. They're taking a human rights approach, they're embedding it, and I don't think the embedding bit has gone very far, but I think people are doing something that they haven't done before, which is good. Okay?
Yes. Look, thank you. Well, we said this to everyone who, if anybody wants to submit anything further about their experience in writing, they can do. You've managed to get yours down to a very short sheet of paper there.
Yeah.
But is there, and it's really useful for us to hear first-hand experience from people, and we've had that in all of our hearings, and it's extremely valuable to us. And it's an important counterpoint to what we hear from providers and commissioners and others. But is there anything you want to say finally in conclusion, or anything you think you've not covered, or anything that you would just like to say in ending the session?
Well, I think the lack of dignity is, for me, the most important thing. I've always felt I have been dignified in everything I do, and I think that was it was a very stark reminder that there's only this much between dignity and non-dignity, and I think for me that was the more important thing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.